"Dad, he looks exactly like my dead brother." The words from the 8-year-old girl's mouth made Tom freeze. On a chilly late afternoon, as he and his daughter walked past a dark alley and saw a quiet blind boy holding a cane, 10 years of buried grief suddenly resurfaced. Tom knew that from that moment, he couldn't turn his back on the truth that was emerging. Late autumn wind swept through the red brick houses. Tom, 42, was a civil engineer. Average build, a little worn. His 2-room apartment in Dorchester was tidy. An old rug, worn upholstered chairs, a few toys scattered on the floor. On the fridge were photos of a younger Tom, wedding pictures from Cape Cod, and a blurry snapshot of tiny Dave Miller. 10 years ago, a funeral in the rain. Tom held his ex-wife, rainwater mixing with tears. His son Dave's small coffin made him feel powerless. Since then, his life had an unfillable void. His wife had also left him 5 years ago due to a malignant illness. Now, Tom only had Emma, 8 years old, bright and quick, his sole motivation to live and strive. During the day, Tom helped her with spelling. At night, he read stories, pausing at exciting parts for Emma to guess what happened next. Their bond kept the room warm in the cold wind. Tom's routine followed the subway schedule. Bus to Ashmont, transfer to the Red Line, to Miller and Company, an office full of coffee-stained blueprints. The phone rang. "Tom, you must remember your place in society." His mother, Ann Thorne, said, her voice cold and even. "Don't let your emotions get the better of you." He replied, "Yes, Mom." Hanging up, he sighed, still trying to please her. That afternoon, Tom took Emma through Downtown Crossing. Toys and Joys glowed with lights. Emma clutched a building kit, skipping happily and chattering. "I'm going to build a suspension bridge with twin towers." Tom nodded slightly, smiling as he ruffled her hair. Near Tremont Street, in a narrow alley, was a small figure. Pat Ryan, about 10, in a thin jacket and torn jeans. A white cane lay beside him. Passersby didn't spare a glance. Tom stopped short. His mother's voice echoed, "Homeless people just take advantage of kindness." He remembered the last argument with his ex-wife about giving money to beggars. It ended in silence. In front of him, this boy was too quiet. "I'll try it just once, this one time," Tom thought. He pulled out his worn leather wallet today. It only held 3 $20 bills. No cards, no ID. He pretended to fumble for his keys, letting the wallet drop onto the brick pavement. A soft thud. Tom kept walking, eyes darting from the corner of his eye. Emma, holding her toy box, was engrossed in talking about cable cars. Pat tilted his head. His calloused hand traced the bricks, touched the wallet, opened it, and felt the paper money. A moment of hesitation, then the wallet disappeared into his faded pocket. He sat still, head bowed. Tom exhaled, just like everyone else. He tightened his grip on Emma's hand, intending to hurry away. Emma stopped abruptly. Her small hand gripped Tom's painfully. Her face went pale, eyes wide. She stared straight at Pat. Tom leaned down. "Emma, what's wrong?" Her voice was a mere whisper. "Dad, he looks exactly like my dead brother." There was no question in her voice. Tom's heart skipped a beat, then pounded. He turned back toward the alley. A thin jacket, a child sitting silently, seemingly unaware. Dave had died 10 years ago, before Emma was even born. She had never seen a picture of him. How could she say such words? Tom was afraid to reopen that old wound. Yet, her words had struck the scar he had kept so well hidden. A child's imagination? Or something else surfacing? He scooped Emma up, holding her close to his chest. Tom's eyes were fixed on Pat. Between fear and obsession, an irrational flicker of hope appeared. He couldn't ignore it, not this time. Tom took a deep breath, set Emma down, and held her hand. He turned back toward the alley, each heartbeat like a hammer. The alley near Tremont was narrow and dark. The smell of fried food from the corner restaurant mixed with the damp scent of wet bricks. Pat Ryan sat leaning against the wall, his cane diagonally across his lap. Each time someone passed, he tilted his head slightly as if catching a current of wind. Pat huddled in his thin jacket, his back against the metal door of a souvenir shop. Water-soaked cardboard, the smell of decaying paper mixed with night garbage. The rusty door latch creaked. Then water poured down, freezing cold. Pat flinched, his hands fumbling for his cane. "Get out, you dirty beggar. Don't hang around here anymore." Mike Lee, the shop owner, snapped, his voice dry as stone. Pat stammered, I'm sorry." He braced himself on the edge of the step, using his cane to stand up. Water still streamed in streaks. "Go," Mike added, then slammed the door shut, the lock clicking. Pat pulled his crooked sunglasses back into place, tilting his head slightly to listen for traffic. He felt each paving brick with his cane, the tip tapping clunk against the wall. The early morning breeze snaked through the gaps between buildings. From the corner diner drifted the smell of roasted coffee, hot butter, and toasted bread. The ground vibrated slightly as a bus approached. The dry screech of brakes, the doors hissing open, then the rapid thud of shoes going up and down. Someone hurried past, shoulder bumping Pat. "Move." A woman's voice, cold. She walked around him as if avoiding a puddle, muttering, "Beggar." Pat bowed his head, pressing against the wall. He was used to those sighs, used to the tutting sounds. In Boston, every morning was like this. Pat walked slowly, his left hand tracing the raised brick lines on the wall, his right hand gripping his cane. He counted his steps, 45 steps to the corner, 3 steps down, waiting for the metallic tick-tick of the pedestrian signal. When the light sounded, Pat crossed the street. The smell of mist from the Charles River lingered for a moment, then vanished amidst the scent of kitchen smoke. He sat down in a wall alcove, his stomach rumbling faintly. In his pocket, the leather wallet was still there, heavier than anything Pat had ever carried. His fingers touched the edge of the wallet, brushed over the worn stitching. 3 thick bills, slightly rough at the edges. With this much, he could buy hot pastries, soup, even a thick blanket at the flea market. He swallowed. His stomach clenched. His life had been full of suffering from the moment he arrived in this world. He wasn't welcomed into a warm room with a loving family. There was only a cold trash bin and a nauseating stench. He didn't know how long he was there, only remembered the screech of the bin lid opening and trembling hands picking him out. "Oh my God," a hoarse woman's voice. "Betty." She wrapped him in a half-knitted sweater, smelling of cheap wine and old soap. Betty taught Pat to see with his ears and hands. Cane touches the wall 3 times. You turn right. Cane slides. It's smooth ahead. Be careful. She tapped rhythms on his palm to count steps. They sat on the steps of the public library on warm evenings, eating cookies someone had given them. Betty gave him a last name, Ryan, as if to say, "It sounds like a good person." Pat didn't know his birthday. She said, "Just consider it the day it's less cold." The day Betty died, the first snow had just fallen. She had coughed for days, her body burning yet shivering. That morning, Pat touched her cheek and found it cold as stone. He called and called, but only heard the sound of cars on the boulevard. No one answered. From then on, he was alone. His cane, sunglasses, and a few instructions. Don't lie. Don't take what isn't yours. Now, those instructions repeated in his head like the pedestrian signal. Tick, tick, tick. Pat tucked the bills back in, closed the wallet. "This money isn't mine," he mumbled. "Whoever dropped it, they probably need it." Pat opened the wallet and felt around some more. His finger touched the hard edge of something small and smooth. He pulled it out, clipped it between 2 fingers, tracing the edge. There was embossed print, a business card Betty had once described them. Pat couldn't read it, but he could ask someone else to read it for him. He followed the scent of fresh fruit to the corner near Prudential. Sarah Bell's stand, the elderly woman who stacked apples into towers. "Hey, don't touch." Sarah barked when she heard his cane hit the shelf. Pat quickly pulled his hand back. "I'm sorry. Ma'am, could you read this for me?" His voice was urgent, clear. A beat of silence. The sound of paper shifting in her hand. Sarah exhaled sharply. "Let's see. Miller and Company, Engineering. Tom Miller, 123 Elm Street, downtown Boston." She looked up, her voice softening slightly. "Whose is this, and how do you have it?" Pat shook his head. I found it." She narrowed her eyes, likely observing his sunglasses and cane. She placed the card back in his hand. "Go on, don't block the way." "Thank you, ma'am." Pat hugged the wallet to his chest, turning away. He repeated in his head, "Tom Miller, 123 Elm Street, downtown." The name stayed with him like a rhythm. He walked along the brick wall, his cane tapping clunk clunk as it explored the edge of the sidewalk. Obstacles loomed, utility poles, trash cans, temporary advertising signs. Pat dodged them with his shoulders, narrowing his body like a leaf. The smell of exhaust fumes was thick. Truck horns tore through the street. "Keep going straight," a passerby said quickly, as if chasing him. "Over there." Another voice waved a hand, but the intersection was too wide. Sounds echoing from all four directions blurred everything. Pat turned back, asking again. No one answered. He stood still, listening to the tick-tick of the crosswalk signal, waiting for a safe rhythm, then stepped. Twice he almost tripped over a trash can. Once he scraped the edge of a planter, his shins stinging. He gripped the wallet tightly in his pocket, as if forcing himself not to turn back. It took him all morning, but finally downtown revealed itself with the clatter of an elevator in a large, air-conditioned lobby. 123 Elm Street. The glass facade gleamed like water. Pat felt his way to the revolving door. His cane touched the smooth metal plate, and he stepped in by instinct. "Hey kid, what are you doing here? This is a private area." A loud man's voice, close, smelling strongly of coffee and cheap cologne. A heavy hand placed on Pat's chest, pushing him out of the revolving door. His cane wobbled. I just want to return this." Pat reached out, offering the wallet. "No, get out." The hand was stronger, pressing into his collarbone. The cane slipped from his grasp, falling onto the cold, shiny stone floor. Ray Dean, the security guard, paused for a beat, then took long strides. His heels crunched on a piece of glass, a chilling sound. "My cane! I can't go anywhere without it." Pat knelt, his hands fumbling aimlessly. "Get up! Go!" Ray yelled. Passersby stopped for a moment, then continued on their way. The main door opened, the street wind pushing street smells into the lobby. Tom Miller had just stepped over the doormat, holding a paper coffee cup, his mind on a meeting on the 12th floor. Fragmented childish voices reached his ears. "My cane, I can't see." Tom stopped. The sound of a cane hitting the floor, the sound of shoes stepping on something. He turned around. In front of the reception desk, Ray was bending over, his face scowling. A boy sat hunched, hands wrapped around his knees, surrounded by broken glass. The wooden cane lay diagonally, as if marking a line of endurance. Tom strode forward. "Ray, what's going on?" His voice was flat but firm. Ray looked up quickly. "This kid was trying to sneak in. Enough." Tom stepped past, knelt beside Pat, placing his coffee cup to the side. "Are you okay, kid?" Pat looked up at the voice. He couldn't clearly see the face, only heard the steady breathing and felt a hand gently placed on his shoulder, warm and firm. He wiped away tears with the back of his hand, his voice trembling. I'm not a thief, sir. I just wanted to return this wallet. Someone dropped it yesterday, and I picked it up. I found a business card inside. I'm blind, so I didn't know my way. I didn't want to cause trouble." Tom carefully picked up the cane and handed it to the boy. He looked up, meeting the cloudy, dull eyes behind wet lashes. A fleeting detail the pursed lips as he tried to bear the pain. The slight furrow of his brow struck a chord in his memory. He heard himself utter soundlessly, "No way. Davy?" The image of Tiny Dave suddenly came alive, his hands clinging to Tom's every time he got a shot, his eyes trying to remain calm until they were red-rimmed. That sharp pang made Tom swallow hard. He took the wallet Pat offered, opening it. 3 $20 bills lay perfectly flat, their edges still dry, a faint smell of old leather wafting up. Not a single cent missing. Ray stammered. I'm sorry, I thought he... Tom just gave him a glance, brief and cold. Ray fell silent, taking a step back. "Thank you, Pat, very much. You did a wonderful thing," Tom said, his voice slow and clear. He touched the boy's shoulder, just enough pressure to reassure him. Pat nodded, his hands clasped together to stop trembling. He looked back at Pat. "You've come a long way just to return a wallet. Boston isn't easy to navigate even for adults, let alone a kid." He paused, as if catching his breath. "I owe you an apology on behalf of this place." Pat shook his head vigorously. "No, I just wanted to do what was right." Betty said, "Don't take what isn't yours." The words made Tom stop. He thought of his mother's repeated warnings, "Don't let emotions get the better of you," and Emma's bright eyes talking about the tension cables of the model bridge. Fragments of days past seemed to arrange themselves into a picture. At his feet, a shard of glass reflected the white ceiling, flickering. Ray stood meekly to one side. Passersby looked less. The usually cold building lobby became quiet. Tom closed the wallet, putting it back in his pocket. He spoke slowly, as if laying the foundation for a new bridge. "We'll go up to the 12th floor. It's warmer there. Have you eaten anything?" Pat hesitated. "Not yet." "Then we'll eat first, then go to the eyewear store." After that, Tom paused, hearing his own heartbeat soften. "We'll talk. About where you found the wallet and other things." As the elevator doors closed, Tom realized he had just stepped into a story that blueprints and regulations couldn't guide, and the first question he was about to ask would unearth another deeply buried memory. The elevator doors opened on the 12th floor. Tom led Pat into his office, a glass-walled room overlooking the river. Drawing tables covered with markers and suspension bridge sketches. He pulled a swivel chair close to the heater, handed Pat some tissues, then turned to the reception desk. "Ray, go to Target or Sears and get me a warm outfit, a jacket, canvas shoes, socks. Get his size. Go now." Ray gripped the brim of his hat, looking down. "Yes, Mr. Miller." His eyes still held a hint of fear. He made another call. "Hello, this is Emma Miller's father. Can she leave school early today? I'll pick her up at the main gate." Tom hung up, turning back. "All right, Pat?" "Yes, it's warmer now." Pat wiped his hands, sat up straight, his cane across his lap. Ray returned surprisingly quickly with a Target bag. I think I got the right size." Tom nodded. "Thanks. Pat, the bathroom's on the left. You can change." When Pat emerged in gray sweatpants, a clean t-shirt, a dark blue jacket, and new, still stiff canvas shoes, Emma appeared at the door, still breathless from running. "Pat," she gave him a quick hug, placing the building kit in his hands. "You can borrow this. We can assemble some of the joints while we wait for the doctor." Pat touched the edge of the box in surprise, letting out a soft laugh. "It's heavy." Emma chattered about her class. "Today I took attendance for the teacher because the mic was broken." Everyone laughed. Pat couldn't see, but hearing her laugh, he sat up straighter. Tom watched the two children sitting on the engineer's rug, his heart softening a rare notch. "Let's go eat," he said. Pete's diner was just as always, reddish-brown neon lights, a shiny steel counter, the smell of grilled meat mixed with onions. Pete, the silver-bearded owner, looked up from the kitchen. "Tom, long time no see. You're usually a regular here, but you've been gone all week." Tom smiled. "A corner booth for 3, please." Pete glanced at Pat, his eyes softening slightly. "We have fresh cheeseburgers. Can the young man eat that?" "Yes." Pat nodded, hesitant as if afraid to be impolite. 2 cheeseburgers, fries, chicken soup for little Emma, 3 sodas. Pete called to the kitchen. Pat ate slowly at first, then faster due to hunger. He remained polite, closing his lips with each chew, his other hand resting lightly on the edge of the table. Emma watched, chin in hand, her eyes wide with delight whenever Pat praised the food as delicious. Tom sat opposite, finding himself smiling more than he rarely did, just at the sound of silverware clinking against plates. When the plates were half empty, Tom asked softly, "Pat, tell me what about your family?" Pat put down his fork, wiping his mouth. His voice was flat. "I don't know my birth parents. When I was tiny, Betty picked me out of a big trash can. She often drank, but she loved me very much. She taught me to listen to the road, feel the bricks, count steps. She died when I was 7. The first snow, I woke up and called, but she wasn't breathing. From then on, I was alone." Emma was silent, reaching under the table to hold Pat's hand. Then she looked up at Tom, speaking softly enough for only the two of them to hear. "Dad, I still think he looks so much like Dave." Tom sat in silence. From the corner of the kitchen, the oil sizzled. He looked at Pat, the head tilt when listening, the slight furrow of the brow when searching for words, too many familiar pieces. He swallowed hard, raising his water glass to cover the lump in his throat. His phone vibrated. "Mom." Tom glanced at Emma, then answered. Ann Thorne's voice was dry and cold. "Have you dealt with that homeless boy at the office yet?" "Mom, his name is Pat. He returned my wallet, not a cent missing. I took him to eat, then to Dr. Kent for an eye exam. I plan to—" "You plan to bring him home, don't you?" Ann cut him off. "Tom, you're indulging your weakness again. Don't get involved with those kinds of people. Have you forgotten the cost of weakness? What did we lose because of it? That accident, do you think it was natural?" Her voice dropped, sharp as a knife. "Don't add more burdens to your neck." "Mom." The phone hung up. The screen returned to black. Tom put the phone down, exhaling slowly. Emma looked at him, worried. Pat heard the sigh, sitting still without asking. Pete brought the soup, placing it gently. "Anything else, just call me." He retreated, leaving a private space for the 3 of them. Tom stirred his spoon in the soup bowl, the scent of ginger and celery rising. He felt the invisible threads that had wrapped around his wrists since that year, the rainy day, the small coffin, then the insistent calls telling him to be strong. He knew his mother's voice could wear down any intention if he let it linger. Tom clutched his phone, his eyes resting on the two children in front of him, one his flesh and blood, the other a painful, blurry mirror, and understood that the 4 o'clock appointment wouldn't just be about eyes. It would touch upon a secret Anne had tried to hide from him for 10 years. A few days later, the Dorchester apartment smelled of soap and cookie crumbs. Pat sat on the sofa, new sunglasses Tom had given him resting on his nose, hair neatly combed, his hand tracing the edge of a blanket. On television was a program about the night sky. Emma sat close, her voice clear. "This is Orion. The belt has 3 stars in a row. You touch the edge of the table, count 3 fingers, and that's the right spot." Pat smiled, following Emma's hand. "Sounds like a sound map." The door burst open before the doorbell rang. Anne Thorne stood there, a wool coat, hair in a high bun, smelling of crisp perfume, her eyes scanning the room as if taking inventory. "Tom, what are you doing?" Her voice was not exactly loud, but strained. Tom came out of the kitchen, towel in hand. "Mom, you didn't call ahead." Emma sprang off the sofa, giving Anne a quick hug. "Grandma, this is Pat. He's really nice." "Grandma, he looks just like my brother Dave." Tom flinched slightly, and Pat turned his head toward the sound of running. He took off his glasses, handing them to Emma. "Can you wipe the left temple for me? It's a bit dusty." The moment the glasses left his eyes, the room seemed to slide into silence. Pat's cloudy white eyes were revealed, the rim of his lashes trembling slightly. Anne looked straight at him, then at his nose, the corner of his mouth, the way he pursed his lips when he held his breath. Her hand fumbled for the doorframe. Her face went completely pale. "No," she gasped softly, her knees seeming to buckle. Tom managed to steady her elbow. Emma looked at the two of them, bewildered. "Grandma, are you not feeling well?" Pat asked, his voice slow and polite. He reached out as if to find a place to put his glasses back, but Emma gently helped him. Anne swallowed hard. "Stay away from me." She adjusted her collar, taking one step back, her eyes closing like steel doors. The cold, sterile smell. Over 10 years ago, delivery room number 3. Alice cried out briefly, then fainted, sweat soaking her temples. Tom Young then stood by the door, his eyes on the white space of the curtain. Anne pulled at the edge of her coat, keeping the fabric from wrinkling. The Miller family must emerge from here perfect, she thought. Yellow light. The first cry tore through the room, sharp, strong. A nurse carried a red-faced baby boy past Anne, smelling of milk and raw blood. Immediately after, Dr. Kane pulled her into a corner of the hallway, where the light hit the tiled floor, creating a gray streak of water. "Mrs. Thorne," he said softly, avoiding her gaze. "We have a problem. One of the two shows signs of severe congenital blindness, cataracts. There's a small hole in the heart, needs monitoring. The child will need a lot of intervention. A lot." Anne lifted her chin. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Dr. Kane replied, clutching his clipboard. She walked into the nursery. The second baby lay more still, its eyelids cloudy like mist, its chest rising and falling gently, its weak hands opening and closing. She looked, and felt something inside her close off. A perfect family had no room for uncertainty. The envelope opened out of habit. Inside were stacks of 10s and 20s, smelling of new paper. She placed the envelope in Dr. Kane's hand, her voice even. "You will tell my son and daughter-in-law that this baby died shortly after birth. The other one, Dave, will be my grandson. Do you understand?" Dr. Kane looked at the envelope, hesitating for a split second, then nodded. "I understand." Tom brought Dave home a few days later. The baby was healthy, his cries loud. Alice slept leaning on her husband's shoulder, still pale, her smile thin as paper. Anne stood on the porch, wind blowing through the neighbor's roof. She had chosen, and everything would be in order, she told herself. But order was not lasting. One damp afternoon, she knelt beside the garage, the smell of grease on her hands. Her gloved hand rotated a brake component. "Just a little loose," she mumbled, her eyes dry. "Tom will learn to be careful. Just a slight brake failure." A few weeks later, a siren, the sound of twisted steel, the smell of burnt smoke. Dave Jr., the healthy child, didn't make it. Tom stood in the rain, holding Alice, his world shattered. Anne stood behind them, her face like a wall. And the other baby. The hospital kept it a secret for a short time. Enough so that Tom and his wife knew nothing of its existence. One night, Anne carried it out the back door, wrapped in an old blanket, whispering softly as if singing a lullaby. You won't ruin his life. The alley in the slum reeked of garbage. The bin lid screeched open. She placed the baby in the darkness, her heart still beating steadily and quietly. She didn't look back. Then came the long years of shaping Tom with words. Be strong, don't let emotions get the better of you. You lost your son because you weren't careful. Each sentence was like a line on the road, guiding him straight according to her will. Present. Anne blinked, the colors of the apartment returning. Her heart pounded in her throat. Pat sat neatly, glasses back on, Emma's hand resting gently on the back of his. Tom stood across from the coffee table, looking at his mother, not asking but clearly waiting for some explanation for her recent trembling. Would you like some tea, Grandma? Pat spoke first, his politeness almost stinging Anne. No need. She replied softly, her voice not yet steady. She looked at Pat as if looking at a shadow that had just emerged from a hospital corridor. This shadow could say yes, could say thank you, could sit neatly. But those cloudy eyes, they were the seal of 10 years ago. You're letting Pat stay here? Anne asked Tom, her voice regaining its coldness. For a short while, waiting to hear what the doctor says. He returned my wallet. Anne smirked. A convenient story. She looked at Emma. Up to your room, darling. Emma squeezed Pat's hand, looking at Tom. Tom nodded. Go on up first, kiddo. She hesitated, then left. The three of them remained. Anne walked slowly around the coffee table, her hand gliding over the wooden edge. You don't understand what you're opening the door to, Tom. I understand I'm doing the right thing, Tom said, his voice calm. Mom, don't lecture me. Anne cut in, her eyes flashing steel. She turned to Pat, measuring the distance precisely as if measuring a step. Boy. Yes? How long will you be here? I don't know. Up to Mr. Tom. She took a deep breath, pulling her mask back on. I apologize for earlier. I came unexpectedly. She turned to Tom, smiling in a practiced way. I'll call you later to discuss the company scholarship fund. Tom looked at that smile as if looking at a crooked stamp. He didn't reply. Anne went to the door. Her hand touched the doorknob, pausing for a moment. In her mind were the hospital corridor, the screeching trash bin lid, the smell of old brake fluid. She knew what was returning. Not regret, but the fear of being seen. Her reputation, the galas, the interviews about family discipline, all could crumble because of a boy sitting watching television with her granddaughter. Stepping down the threshold, she pulled out her phone, scrolling to a name she hadn't dialed in a long time. Kane. No answer. She left a concise message. Meet me tonight. Old business. Then she deleted the call history. The decision emerged like bubbles in a glass of wine. He had to disappear. This time, permanently leaving no tangled traces as before. She looked back at the apartment window, the curtain swaying gently. Inside, Pat was probably laughing at a constellation Emma had just described. Outside, Boston was beginning to enter night, dew settling on car hoods. Anne pulled up her collar, stepping into the dark hallway, a old key in her pocket and a plan locking into place, step by step. In the morning, Pat woke up on a soft mattress, his hand touching the cool sheets. He lay still for a few seconds, listening to the bus at the end of the street, the old elevator sighing softly, Tom's footsteps passing through the kitchen. Emma knocked twice, a familiar rhythm. Are you awake? Yes, Pat replied, sitting up, putting on clean socks that smelled of sunshine. He folded the blanket, placing the corner even with the edge of the bed as Tom had shown him. Small changes, but they kept a person upright. At breakfast, Tom poured milk, fried eggs, and put bread in the toaster. Pat sat at the table, listening to the butter sizzle gently in the pan, the smell of coffee rising. He learned the routes around the apartment. 3 steps from the table to the sink, 7 steps to the balcony. His left hand touching the edge of the refrigerator was the right direction to the living room. The wooden cane was still within reach, but Pat rarely needed it indoors, Tom observed. He saw that Pat didn't demand, nor did he avoid. He simply listened, remembered, and followed instructions. The bond came from small things. Washing dishes together, adjusting the rug's position so Pat wouldn't trip, stopping the car at the nearby park. In the park, Tom placed Pat's hand on the trunk of an oak tree. This cracked bark means it's an old tree. Pat pressed his ear, listening to the wind through the leaves like small waves. Tom led him along the wooden railing, describing the water, the quacking ducks, the distant sound of the Red Line train. Emma ran ahead, turning back to announce each step. "Hold my hand," Emma said. Pat grasped it, walking steadily. In the evenings, Emma called Pat brother, as naturally as if it had been so for a long time. Tom heard it for the first time, felt his chest tighten, then soften. Affection transcended pity. He began to think in plurals. What will we eat? Where will we go this weekend? The words "dad, son" slipped into his mind once or twice when calling Pat, making him startle, fall silent, then look up at Emma. She only smiled. Doctor. Kent's office was brightly lit, smelling faintly of antiseptic. Doctor. Kent, silver-haired, kind-eyed, shook everyone's hand, speaking slowly. "Pat, I'm going to shine a bright light into your eyes. Don't be afraid." He rested Pat's chin on the chin rest, adjusting its height. The light swept across, reflecting the cloudy membrane behind his pupils. He changed lenses, took notes, silent for a long time. In the room, there was only the sound of a pen scratching on paper. Tom stood behind Pat, his hand on the boy's shoulder, steadying him. Emma sat in a chair, her feet dangling but silent. "Doctor," Kent turned back. "Just as I suspected. Pat has severe congenital cataracts because it's been left untreated for so long. His eyes and brain have adapted to the blurred vision. So surgery cannot restore his sight to normal. But," he paused for Pat to listen, "we can remove the cloudy layer. After surgery and training, you will see much better. Enough to be independent, read large print, move around the house, recognize faces at close range. It will require 2 surgeries, a few days apart." Pat held his breath. "Really? Really?" No promise of miracles, but a promise of practical improvement. Dr. Kent nodded. A gasp of breath burst from Pat's chest as if he had just surfaced from water. He raised his hands to cover his eyes, his shoulders trembling. Tom pulled him into his arms, hugging him tightly. Emma pressed her hand against Pat's back, whispering, "You'll see me make funny faces at you. Just wait." "What about the cost?" Dr. Kent continued, handing over an estimate. Tom looked at the numbers, his throat tightening. His savings covered half. The rest meant selling off things he still kept from his previous marriage, or taking out a loan. He didn't think for too long. "I'll take care of it," Tom said. "Pat will have the surgery." Pat looked up, his face wet. "Doctor, you don't have to." "I do," Tom cut in, his voice firm and low. "We're doing it. If there's no other way, we'll borrow." "That's it, Doctor." Kent nodded, placing a hand on Tom's shoulder. "I'll schedule it for next week, the earliest. From now on, Pat should still wear sunglasses to ease eye strain. At home, let him get used to the darkness, don't make sudden changes." Leaving the clinic, the wind blew strongly. Pat gripped his cane, smiling through tears. "Emma, if I get my sight back, what's the first thing I'll see?" "You'll see me first," Emma replied immediately, waving her arm proudly. Tom laughed, a rare lightness in his voice. Anne heard the news through a hurried video call. Emma was excited. "Grandma, Pat's having surgery next week. Dad said everything's all set." The screen reflected Anne's face hardening for half a second. Then she said, "Good," in a calm voice. After the call, she stood at the window, looking at the low clouds covering the Boston sky. A single thought ran through her mind. If he sees, everything will unravel. Fear was no longer a wisp of smoke. It was a stone in her chest, heavy and concrete. Anne took out her notebook, turning to an old page where names never saved on her phone were once written in blue ink. She called. The other end was silent for a few beats, then a man's deep, hoarse voice. "It's been a long time." "I need something clean," Anne said briefly. "How clean?" "Enough so no one asks questions. Delivered tomorrow night." The silence was like a weighing scale. "All right." A day later, in Anne's handbag was a small glass vial, silver cap, colorless liquid, a very faint almond smell wafting out when she briefly opened it to check. She stored it deep in a lined compartment, next to a pair of thin gloves. No notes, no messages. She called Tom. "I'll come over this weekend. I want to make a celebratory dinner, just family." Tom paused for a few seconds. "Okay, but keep it simple." "Yes, I'll bring dessert." Anne planned the event like a fundraising gala. Arrival time, serving time, who sat where. Dessert was the key. A soft cake, rich sauce, vanilla, and chocolate, strong enough to mask anything unusual. She pictured her hand pouring sauce, stirring evenly, at the right moment, in the right place, for the right person. No deviation. No hesitation. The night before dinner, Anne stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her hair, trying out a smile. She opened a drawer, looking at the silent glass vial like an unblinking eye. She whispered, not to reassure herself, but to confirm, "This time, you will disappear forever." The doorbell rang the next evening, the smell of chocolate already filling the kitchen, and on the table were 3 white plates in their precise positions. Anne arrived early. She walked around the apartment like a construction supervisor. Tablecloth edges straight, cutlery arranged parallel, glass cups spotless. The hourly hired helper was fumbling with string lights. Anne said briefly, "A little higher." Tom wore a white shirt, light gray tie. Emma a smooth blue dress, braided hair. Pat a small plaid shirt, his hands fidgeting with the hem due to unfamiliarity. "It's okay," Tom said softly, squeezing Pat's shoulder. "Just a few acquaintances. Dinner, then an early night." "Yes," Pat replied, taking a deep breath, adjusting his sunglasses. Guests gradually arrived. Mrs. Chen, the neighbor, brought a basket of bread. Linda Park and Josh, Tom's colleagues, carried a bouquet of flowers. Ray Dean awkwardly stood at the door, holding a bottle of fruit juice, avoiding Pat's gaze, then bowing deeply in apology. Pete from the diner stopped by briefly, placing a plate of cold cuts, then excusing himself due to being busy in the kitchen. Greetings mingled with the smell of grilled meat Tom was tending. In the kitchen, Anne wore thin gloves, whisking chocolate mousse in a stainless steel bowl. The cream was smooth and glossy. She divided it into small glass cups. One special cup she poured an extra half spoon of chocolate sauce to deepen the flavor was placed in the top right corner of the middle shelf of the refrigerator. She glanced over her shoulder. No one at the door. She tilted the glass vial, counting the drops. 1 drop, 2 drops, dissolving into the cream as if vanishing. The cap was tight. The cup was placed back in the exact right corner. Her hand did not tremble. The shelf closed with a faint click. The living room buzzed with activity. Emma showed Linda her model suspension bridge. Linda praised, "Emma, you're so talented." Pat stood nearby, listening, sometimes smiling when Emma pulled his hand to feel the cables. Tom placed a tray of appetizers down, speaking softly to Ray. "Thanks for coming." Ray nodded, his voice hoarse. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry, Pat." "It's okay," Pat replied softly, nodding in the direction of the voice. The main course was cozier than Tom expected. Everyone asked about the surgery. Tom told just enough, without elaborating. Emma interjected with a few jokes that made everyone laugh. Pat mostly listened, occasionally contributing a short sentence. The atmosphere slowed, becoming easier to breathe. Before dessert was served, Pat felt thirsty. He stood up, traced the edge of the table, and entered the kitchen. He had learned the way. 4 steps to the counter, 2 more steps to the refrigerator. The fridge door opened, cold air wafting onto his face. The smell of chocolate was distinct. Inside were rows of glass cups. Pat touched the rim of the nearest cup with his fingertips cold, with condensation. He picked it up, his other hand supporting the bottom. The light, thick mousse inside swayed gently, its sweet, rich scent filling his nose. He turned the cup, his thumb accidentally touching the slightly sticky rim of the lid. Instinct made Pat hesitate. He put the cup down, moved 1 step closer to his left, to the exact position where the cup had just been. Then his hand searched for the next cup. The second cup was evenly cool, its rim dry. He smiled faintly at the aroma. But thinking of the surgery, and avoiding overly sweet things, he reminded himself. Just water. Pat closed the fridge, took a water pitcher from the lower shelf, poured it into a glass, and drank it down. He turned back to the living room, the fridge door closing behind him. On the shelf, the 2 cups were in their swapped positions. Dinner continued. Tom poured a little more wine for Linda and Josh while he drank water. Mrs. Chen told stories about her balcony tomato garden. Ray distractedly spun his juice glass, watching Tom's movements as if wanting to do something right. Pat listened to the sound of spoons hitting plates, the soft scrape of chairs. Tom looked at Emma, then at Pat. The decision, which had been simmering in his chest for days, rose to his lips. He put down his fork, cleared his throat. Pat, and everyone. He paused, listening to his heart. "Emma and I have talked. We want you to become a part of this family. We want to adopt you." Emma jumped up, "Really, Dad?" Then hugged Pat. He froze for half a second, his hands resting on Emma's shoulders, exhaling as if a thin layer of ice had broken. Anne gave a thin smile, standing up immediately. "Oh, Tom, that's wonderful," she said, her voice strangely soft. "But let's not get sentimental yet." She clasped her hands. "First, enjoy Grandma's dessert." She turned into the kitchen, opening the refrigerator. Her hand went straight to the top right corner, like a machine. The cup was there in the exact position she remembered. She placed the cups on a tray, arranging them in a row. The cup from the right corner was placed closest to the edge of the tray, marked by its very position. Anne returned, her smile still on her lips. "Chocolate mousse, Grandma's old recipe." She set the tray down. "Tom, can you help serve everyone?" Tom stood, distributing them one by one. Linda, Josh, Mrs. Chen. Emma grabbed a cup for Pat. "This one's yours." "Thank you," Pat accepted, his hand searching for a spoon. Tom placed a cup in front of Emma, then one for Ray. 2 cups remained on the tray. Anne leisurely said, "The last cup is for my son." She pushed the one closest to the edge towards Tom, her other hand very naturally pushing the remaining cup to herself. Everyone raised their spoons, the sound of spoons gliding through the smooth mousse. Emma cheered. "Delicious." Mrs. Chen nodded. Linda praised it as just right. Ray ate slowly, as if trying to be exemplary. Tom hadn't touched his. He watched Pat take his first spoonful, pausing for a moment as if savoring the sweetness, then smiling faintly. "Delicious," Pat said softly. Anne observed around the table. The cup in Pat's hand, wasn't it the one from the right corner? A thought flashed like a flickering light bulb. Had anyone touched the refrigerator in the kitchen? She turned to the fridge, a distant view. The door closed. She forced herself to calm down. The position on the tray was maintained, she told herself. Everything was in place. Tom took a deep breath, deciding to bring his spoon to the cup in front of him. Before the spoon touched the mousse, Emma said loudly, interrupting, "Dad, take a picture first. It's the first time our house has been this full." The girl jumped off her chair, ran to get her phone, calling everyone to, "Look here." Everyone paused for a moment, spoons suspended in midair. Anne maintained her smile, but her fingers under the table clenched her napkin until it was crumpled. The photo snapped. Laughter erupted, then faded. Everyone returned to their dessert. In that ordinary moment, as the spoons simultaneously lowered, only Anne briefly saw that the mousse in Tom's cup was half a shade darker brown. She blinked, not remembering that in the corner of the fridge just now, someone had swapped the positions of the 2 cups. The living room buzzed with fragmented conversation. Emma talked about the upcoming surgery. Ray was more silent than talkative. Tom looked around, trying to keep everything calm after the adoption proposal. Anne sat down, scooped a spoonful, and put it on her tongue. The mousse was smooth, with a slightly bitter aftertaste. She swallowed, her lips still smiling. Pat ate slowly, as if afraid to waste it. Nothing happened. Only his shoulders gradually relaxed, his throat swallowing smoothly. Anne tilted her head, her smile stiffening slightly. Second spoonful, third. Pat was still fine. Anne's heart beat a half beat faster, but reason quickly reassured her. The substance had blended. It was just a slight delay. Anne took another spoonful. Suddenly, a shiver ran down her spine. Something was off. A sharp, bitter taste flashed through, like a faint almond smell from somewhere. She put her spoon down. The air in front of her contracted. Anne reached out to touch her neck. Her breathing grew heavier, deep but shallow. Her eyes widened, the image of the dinner table slightly tilted. "Grandma?" Emma stopped, her voice much higher. Tom jumped up. "Mom?" Anne tried to speak. What? What's happening?" The sound caught in her throat. A sharp cough, then 2 more in quick succession. Her face lost color in mere seconds, turning stark white, her lips slightly purple. She lurched out of her chair, swaying, her hand clawing at the table edge, then slipping. The sound of a chair falling. Everyone rushed forward. Tom couldn't catch her. Anne was already convulsing on the floor, eyes wide, a thin foam at her lips. Linda stammered, calling 911. Mrs. Chen covered her mouth. Ray stood frozen, then knelt, cradling Anne's head with a napkin. Emma clutched Tom's hand, her hand ice cold. "Dad!" Pat stood still, his spoon still held midair. He didn't understand the visual, but heard every sound break. He took a step in the direction of the commotion, then immediately stopped, afraid of stepping on someone. Anne thrashed once, her eyes fixed on Pat where the dark shadow of his sunglasses was. The hatred in those eyes chilled the entire room. She hissed through gritted teeth. That blind, cursed boy. Her last breath broke on the word cursed. Her body went still. For a few seconds, the apartment was silent except for gasping breaths and the clatter of a spoon rolling off the table. Then an ambulance siren from afar echoed like shattering glass. Paramedics entered, performing quick, decisive actions. One shook his head very slightly. Tom stepped back, his hands still trembling, Emma clinging to his side. Pat gripped his cane tightly, his knuckles white. Police arrived later, red and blue lights reflecting on the ceiling. Officer Green, about 40, with a neat face, asked in a calm voice, "Who is the homeowner?" "I am," Tom replied, steadying his voice so it wouldn't break. Green surveyed the scene. A half-cleared dinner table, half-eaten moose cups, one cup tipped over leaving a brown streak. He asked everyone to sit back down, taking out his notebook. "We need to hear from each person." Statements pieced together like mixed-up Legos. Linda said Anne went into the kitchen twice. Mrs. Chen remembered the chocolate smelling stronger than usual. Ray slowly recounted the morning at the building, Pat returning the wallet. No money missing. Pat spoke in an even tone. "I went into the kitchen for water. I didn't eat moose in the kitchen. The cup Grandma gave me, I ate a few spoonfuls." "Did you open the refrigerator?" Green asked. "Yes." "Did you touch anything else?" Pat was silent for a beat, trying to reconstruct the map by touch. I picked up a cup and then put it down. I took a glass of water. I closed the fridge." Tom glanced at Officer Green, his hand unconsciously pulling Emma closer. "What does that mean?" he asked. "We haven't concluded anything," Green replied, his eyes resting on Anne's unfinished moose cup, a shade darker brown than the others. "Forensics will be involved. For now, please don't touch anything." The living room grew a degree colder. Emma looked at Pat, squeezing his hand. "You didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. Pat nodded without being sure. He heard Green's pen scratching, heard the rubber gloves peel off with a pop, heard the rustle of the evidence bag being placed over the glass cup. Green looked up. "Who prepared this dish?" Tom looked down. "My mother, Anne Thorne. She wanted to celebrate." "Did anyone else go into the kitchen?" "People passed through. I grilled food. Pat got water. Everyone went to get napkins." Green nodded, continuing to write. His gaze briefly swept over Pat, then returned to Tom. "We'll have more questions, and my condolences." The apartment was full of people yet felt empty. Forensic personnel collected the few remaining traces, leaving behind sealed strips of tape like red pen marks. The ambulance took the body away. The sound of the elevator door locking echoed hollowly. Tom leaned against the wall, closing his eyes for a second. When he opened them, he saw Pat standing in the same spot, as if afraid a step would cross a boundary. Emma pulled him toward the sofa, placing a glass of water in his hand. "Drink this," she said, with the strange calmness of a child facing something too large. Officer Green closed his notebook, stepping toward Tom. "Tonight we'll have someone stationed around the building. Tomorrow morning, I'd like you and everyone else to come to the station to provide further statements. You can call a lawyer if you wish." Tom nodded, his voice hoarse. "I understand." Green stopped at the doorway, glancing quickly toward the kitchen. The refrigerator was closed, its glass door reflecting a faint streak like a human shadow. He left. As the door closed, Tom suddenly caught a faint, hard-to-name smell in the air reminiscent of bitter almonds and understood that Anne's death would open a much larger closed room than the kitchen tonight. A few days later, the police station lobby smelled of printer paper and cold coffee. Officer Green pulled up a chair. "Mr. Miller, the forensic results are in. Anne Thorne died of cyanide poisoning." Tom froze. "Cyanide? Who could do such a thing?" Green shook his head, his voice even. "We haven't made a judgment. The forensic team is comparing samples from the utensils, glasses, and cups. We are continuing the investigation." Leaving the station, the Boston wind blew cold around his collar. Tom walked beside Pat and Emma, silent. Emma held Pat's hand, her small hand strangely warm. Pat heard Tom's footsteps grow heavy, and softly asked, "Dad, Tom, are you okay?" Tom replied after a beat, "I'm okay. We'll talk when we get home." In the living room, Tom placed a pitcher of water, drawing the curtains to soften the light. He sat opposite Pat, getting straight to the point. "Pat, that night before dessert you went into the kitchen for water, right?" Did you open the refrigerator? Yes. Did you touch any of the mousse cups? Pat clutched the hem of his pants, trying to remember. I picked up one cup. The rim of the cup was a little sticky. The smell was too strong. I put it down. My hand probably touched the cup next to it. I took a glass of water and left. I don't know why they swapped. I just felt the first cup wasn't right. Tom looked down at his hands. The pieces fit together. Anne's marked position, the faint almond smell in the air that night, the way Pat swapped the cups due to a vague feeling. He exhaled slowly, his voice hoarse. If Mom put poison in one specific cup, and you accidentally swapped positions in the fridge, then when she came back, she took the wrong one. Emma blurted out. So she intended to. She stopped mid-sentence, looking at Pat. Pat sat up straighter, as if bracing for a headwind. She didn't like me. Tom nodded, his eyes downcast. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. Silence fell for a few beats. Emma moved closer, resting her head on Pat's arm. You didn't do anything wrong. That afternoon, Tom went to Anne's old house to review funeral papers. The apartment was clinically clean. Closets organized by color, drawers closing with a snug click. Tom opened a low cabinet under the vanity, encountering a small wooden box with a lock. He pulled out the top drawer. Under a velvet lining was an old jewelry box. The bottom of the box hid a thin key. The lock opened with a click. Inside, a small glass vial, silver cap. Tom didn't open it. He only saw a layer of white powder clinging to the rim. Beside it was an opened envelope. His heart skipped a beat when he saw his name in bold. Thomas Miller. Below, Pat Ryan. The printed line. DNA test biological father. Son relationship. 99.99% match. He sank onto the rug. His eyes scanned the words, his mind unable to keep up. Emma had said, looks like Dave. Pat's expression when enduring pain, the tiny furrow of his brow. All were no longer vague feelings. Pat, not just some boy, was his son. Beneath the envelope was a worn, leather-bound notebook. Tom opened it. The smell of old paper, Anne's cold, slanted handwriting. Date. Alice went into labor. 2 boys, one with cloudy eyes, weak heart. Dr. Kane said, burden. I paid him. He told Tom. The first baby died shortly after birth. The second one brought home David. The family must be orderly. Tom never knew. He's too weak. Another page. Brakes need checking, just a slight loosening. An accident will teach him to harden up. Weakness has taken too much. Better to lose once silently. Another page. The blind baby, I took him from the hospital at night. The trash bin behind the warehouse. No one knows. No one must know. Tom is in pain. Good. His soft emotions will let me lead him. The last pages. The boy came back. He resembles what I left behind. He must disappear. Dinner. Mousse. Cup in the right corner. Clean. No traces. The writing stopped abruptly. Blank page. Tom closed the notebook, his forehead resting on the edge of the table. The entire room spun slowly. He clutched the diary until his knuckles were white. In his mind, the 2 names, Dave Jr. and Dave Sr. swapped positions, then stood still. Little Davy in the rain on the day of the funeral, the one he cried himself dry over, was the younger brother. And the one he had cast away for 10 years, who had just eaten dinner in his own kitchen, was the older son, Pat. His phone vibrated. Emma texted, Dad, are you home yet? Pat's almost done with the middle span. Tom felt a pain in his throat, but his reply was still even. I'm on my way. He stuffed the vial and the notebook into his cross-body bag, locked the door, and went down the elevator. In the elevator mirror, his face was ashen. Back home, Tom didn't speak immediately. He told Emma to go to the other room to watch her favorite movie. He sat next to Pat, placing the notebook on the table. Pat, he said brokenly, I found some things at Grandma's house. Pat tilted his head. What is it? Tom opened the envelope, placed the test result in Pat's hand, then remembered he couldn't read. He let out a dry, self-deprecating laugh, then read slowly, word by word, for both of them to hear. Biological father, son relationship, match, 99.99%. Pat sat still, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the paper. Does that mean, you are my son, Tom said, his voice low without any unnecessary drama. You are David, my eldest son. No one hugged anyone immediately. The truth was too big. It needed a moment to settle. Emma poked her head in, eyes wide. Tom gestured gently. She walked slowly, placing a hand on Pat's back. Pat took a breath, as if regaining his heartbeat. "Dad," he tried to say, the sound breaking into 3 syllables. D. Tom turned away for half a second to hide his red eyes, then turned back, placing his palm on Pat's hand. "I'm here." He continued to tell the story, not avoiding anything. About the notebook, about Dr. Kane, about the car brakes, about the cold trash bin. Pat listened, his shoulders tensing in some places, then relaxing. Not a single complaint. When Tom read the line, "Dinner, moose, cup in the right corner," Pat gripped his hands. "So, I swapped the cups." "Yes," Tom said. "You lived, and not because of blind luck. You heard what others couldn't hear." A knock on the door. Officer Green stood outside, holding a sealed envelope. "Sorry for coming late. We have a preliminary report, and need to see some documents if you have them." Tom opened the door wide, placing the diary on the coffee table in the living room. "I also have something you need to see." Green turned the first page, his eyes pausing for a beat at the name Dr. Kane, and the first thing he said was not a condolence. "Mr. Miller, we need to go to the hospital tonight." Tom hurried into the living room, his eyes still wet. Emma and Pat were sitting by the model suspension bridge, meticulously joining pieces. He knelt down, hugging both of them tightly. "Pat, my son, you are Dave Miller, Emma's brother." His breath hitched. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I've been looking for you for 10 years without knowing who I was looking for." Pat hadn't fully grasped the words yet, but Tom's trembling embrace told the rest. He hugged him tightly, his cheek pressed against the shoulder of the shirt that still smelled of sunshine. Emma stood still for a beat, then burst into tears, wrapping her arms around both of them. "Really? You're really my brother?" "Really," Tom said, his voice low but firm. He pulled back, telling the story, not avoiding anything. About the twins, about Anne's icy decision, about the dark trash bin, about the accident that took Dave Jr., about the diary, about the vial of powder and the DNA results. Emma was silent, gripping Pat's hand until her knuckles were white. Pat asked very softly, "Tom's mom, is she my grandma?" Tom nodded. "She did terrible things, but you carry no one's fault." They hugged again, longer, until Officer Green's knock on the door signaled another race. For justice, Tom handed everything: the cyanide vial, the DNA results, the diary to Green. The investigation team opened a procedure, cross-referencing handwriting, tracing financial records from 10 years ago. From Anne's notebook pages, they traced back to Dr. Kane. That night, at the hospital, Kane was handcuffed in the operating room hallway, his face crumbling. He confessed, his voice erratic, about the envelope of money, about the fake papers, about a newborn's name erased from the system. I just thought they wanted to forget," he repeated. But the words carried no less weight. Anne's funeral was short and cold. A few distant relatives, a few old colleagues, black-clad figures scattered under a gray sky. Tom didn't attend. He stayed home, cooking chicken soup, checking Pat's Dave's surgery schedule, and answering Emma's small questions. "Why did Grandma do that, Dad?" "Because she was afraid," Tom replied. "Because she put reputation above people. We don't live like that." The day of the surgery arrived. Dave signed his new Miller surname on the procedure form, his hand trembling slightly. Tom placed a hand on his son's neck, saying very softly, "I'm here." Emma sat in the hallway, clutching a Lego box, like a good luck charm. The operating room door closed. Time stretched into a long thread. The following days were filled with bandages, painkillers, and small exercises that made his eyes ache. Dave learned to open his eyes for a few seconds, then close them. Learned to endure a shattered streak of light. Tom carried his son by the windowsill each afternoon to let the light fall gently, counting to 10. Emma read stories without needing pictures, each word a step. The day the bandages came off, the clinic was so quiet you could hear paper rustle. "Doctor," Kent peeled off the last layer, his voice calm. "Slowly, Dave." Dave blinked. Light flooded in like water. At first, only blurry patches. Then vague outlines became clear. Tom's broad shoulders, Emma's sparkling hair, his own reflection in the glass. He tilted his head, eyes watering. "Dad, Emma, I can see." He laughed, breaking into a sob. "Dad, you're so handsome." Emma burst out, "Of course. What about me?" Dave squinted, as if adjusting a lens in his mind. "Emma, you're so pretty." Tears fell, no longer blurring his vision. His eyesight wasn't perfect. Dave still needed special glasses, still had to learn to read large print, distinguish colors under the right light. But the world now had lines, colors, the faces of loved ones. Tom handled school paperwork. Emma led her brother to sign up for the building club. Every evening, the three ate dinner, sharing small stories. Today, Dave read a bus sign. Emma ran a second faster than her friend. Tom made the first payment on his loan. One early spring afternoon, Tom placed a stack of papers on the table. The bylaws for the Dave's Light Foundation. Emma flipped to the cover. The logo was a partially opened eye, with a lamp inside. "Dave's Light Foundation will help children like you like we once were," Tom said. "Shelter, meals, schooling, doctors, surgeries. No one will be left in the dark just because they're poor." Dave touched his bold printed name, looking up. "Are you sure, Dad? Can we afford it?" "We'll learn how to afford it. Like building a bridge one span at a time." Emma high-fived. "I'll be the media department. I'll tell Dave's story." They started with a small room in the community center, with donated old glasses, with a hotline posted at the train station. An orphan boy stopped by, clutching his aluminum cane. A little girl wearing thick, bottom glasses smiled when she could read large letters. Dave stood and recounted. "I survived because a homeless woman taught me to listen. I was saved by a man who dared to call me son. If you are here, we have a way forward." The world didn't suddenly become gentle, but Dave knew how to turn on the light. Justice came late, but it came. And in the Dorchester apartment, every morning, the sound of the kettle whistling still signaled a new day. 3 bowls on the dining table always waited for everyone.